bring you in, and it's kind of half interview and half just say whatever you feel like. So
I'm recording the Zoom. Do you need anything else, Matt, or is that enough?
Zoom should be enough.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go ahead and intro in and just kind of bring you in on all this. So
hopefully you'll take this intro in the spirit it's intended.
Okay.
In the year 1990, there was a TV show about some nerds on a spaceship, and then they went to another universe and couldn't do their hippie stuff. Who writes this shit?
I don't know. I think we got some writers around, but yeah, today we're getting a little bit, we usually do movies here, but today we're going TV, although I'd say it's pretty cinematic TV.
Yeah.
It's about as cinematic as TV gets. It's The Next Generation, Season 3, episode Yesterday's Enterprise.
Yeah.
So this is Matt.
This is Luke.
Welcome to our Sci-Fi Sanctuary. We could do it in duo if you want.
I don't know, we used to, then we didn't.
Stereo. It just keeps evolving. I think that's a fun thing. But yeah, this one we do have a bit of a treat today because we like to find people that are, good podcasters in the entertainment field. But today we have one of the fellows who actually wrote the story or co-wrote the story for this episode. He worked in the production office for TNG and started one of the first big Star Trek fan clubs, I believe, Starfleet. Hello, Eric Stillwell. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to be here.
Okay, right on.
I think this is the first time we've had a guest who was actually involved in the thing we're talking about.
Yeah, we have some more on the way. But yeah, I believe you're first on this. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Almost feels like we're a real podcast.
And Yesterday's Enterprise could have been a movie because after Next Generation ended and they started making movies, Rick Berman said that if he had known they were going to make movies, they would have saved Yesterday's Enterprise.
Well, yeah, the last Star Trek we recorded actually was Generations, and we talked about that a little.
Yeah, and it would have been really cool if it was the Enterprise A instead of the Enterprise A, and then you would have had Kirk and Spock and all the characters saving the future.
Yeah, I wondered if that was something that was discussed before the episode aired, but that's not the case.
It wasn't. I mean, the original spec script that my writing partner wrote was based on the original. He wanted it. He wanted it to be, but that was one of the rules that the writer's guide for Next Generation didn't allow references back to the original series. So he decided to just skip ahead a generation or so.
Can we lay down?
And then later they started doing references later in the series, but that's once they had grounded themselves with their own history.
Your own serious trekking. I looked at your Wikipedia page and it started. You had a fan club before doing TNG, the Starfleet.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I took over a defunct fan club that had existed previously, but had basically gone out of business, and I restarted it, and it became international club with thousands of members, and it even made the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest sci-fi fan club in the world.
Nice.
And how did you end up starting working in the production offices at TNG?
Well, I was a huge Star Trek fan, as you know, from childhood, and I always dreamt of the opportunity, but in the 70s that really wasn't an option for me. And I went to college in the early 1980s, and I decided after Star Wars had come out in 1977, I was fascinated with the filmmaking process, where Star Trek had inspired more of my interest in social philosophy and stuff. So I majored in political science in college, but I became fascinated with filmmaking after I saw Star Wars when I was 15. So I decided I was going to go to Hollywood and try to work in the entertainment industry. And the very first job I got was as a production assistant on a Warner Brothers film with James Garner and James Woods that was filming up in Oregon where I lived. And one of the executive producers on that movie was the father of Denise Crosby's stand-in on Next Generation. And when we wrapped on that film, I immediately sent my resume down to Hollywood, where they were getting ready to start the Next Generation. And when I went down to Los Angeles for the wrap party on the Warner Brothers movie. And while I was down there, I got a call from the producers who called me in for an interview to be a production assistant on Next Generation. But I didn't get the job because the people they hired had been people who worked on the Paramount lot and had experience working on the lot. They knew where all the buildings were, so they wanted people who could hit the ground running. So as soon as I had an opportunity, I moved to Los Angeles and ended up getting a job as a tour guide at Paramount Studios. And in addition to giving tours, we also did audience control on shows like Cheers and what were the other shows? I can't remember. Anyway, so we got some experience working on some of the live productions, and then one of the production assistants that they had hired on Next Generation got promoted, and the same week they were premiering the pilot episode for the cast and crew at one of the studio theaters on the lot, and they needed 2 studio pages to come and do door duty, and I got asked to do that. So while I was doing door duty at the screening of Encounter at Farpoint, Bob Justman, who was the producer who had interviewed me originally, saw me and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I work here." And literally the next day he called and offered me a job on the show.
Nice.
That's how
That's old school hustle.
Yeah.
So something I've always been interested in, because I was born when Next Gen was already running. So to me, Next Gen is Star Trek, and then the original series is the older thing. But as someone who was, old enough to work in the industry when Next Gen started, how did you feel about it initially? With, your memories of the original series, and here's this new one.
Well, I was 3 years old when the original Star Trek premiered, so I didn't start watching it until it was in reruns in the early 1970s. And I was such a huge fan that when my father was in the Air Force and we were living in Idaho at the time, and the local station in Boise stopped showing the reruns during the summer and put Perry Mason reruns on instead. So my friend and I started a letter writing campaign and got 300 signatures to convince the station to put the reruns of Star Trek back on,
Nice.
which they agreed to do. So by the time I got to Paramount Studios, it was kind of like I had to pinch myself every day just to believe that this was really happening. And one of the cool things about Paramount Studios, where it's located in Hollywood, it's the only major studio located actually in Hollywood. All the other studios are either in Burbank or in Century City and other parts of Los Angeles. But at Paramount, when you're walking between the sound stages, you can literally look up on the hill and see the Hollywood sign. And every day I would just think, I can't believe I'm here doing this. And it was, and of course it wasn't all fun and games because it's hard work and you get in trouble and things don't go right every day, but still it was pretty amazing. And of course, when we first started, we didn't know if the show would be successful. It seems hard to believe now, all these years later, with like 10 or 12 different Star Trek shows in development or in production at this point, that there ever was a question, will Next Generation survive? In the beginning, there was a lot of critics, a lot of fans doubted it. Even the actors, I don't think, were planning on a long career and in Star Trek. I think that's one of the reasons Denise Crosby decided to leave the show. And then I would say, in my personal opinion, during the 3rd season, after Michael Piller became the head writer and the showrunner on the series, that's when the show made
I think most people agree that sort of 3rd season is when it really got into its gear.
In fact, I think it was when yesterday's Enterprise aired.
I was actually about to say this one does feel like kind of a turning point episode.
That was a linchpin for me. I know I was 8 years old when Next Gen's first season aired, and my dad and I watched it, and we kind of I liked it because I was 8, and I still like some of those episodes today, but it was a little clunkier at the time, and I think it was one of my dad's coworkers saying, you need to watch the Star Trek episode. And that was yesterday's Enterprise when we put it on. And, this actually can be like as good as the original series.
Yeah, well, we've got a friend at work, our colleague Rob. He wants to start watching TNG, and he's been really struggling to get through season 1. And I keep promising, okay, I'm going to sit down and write you list of the episodes worth watching. And I feel like by the time I get to, it'll be around this point, midway through season 3, I'll just be like, and from here on, you can just watch them all.
Yeah. I think he gave up when we had Luxwana Troy's head in the box.
Yeah.
He gave up there.
Yeah, the first couple of seasons were a little strange, but some of the highlights for me, because the producers knew I was a huge fan, they would sometimes come to me and ask me Star Trek-y questions. So like the episode The Neutral Zone, where they encountered the Romulans.
Right.
I guess there was a writer strike happening, and they needed someone to come up with some names for the Romulans. And so one of the producers came to me and said, Eric, we need a couple Romulan names. And I looked at him and I'm like, am I just supposed to make it up? And he's like, no, look it up in a Romulan encyclopedia.
You can find those at your library.
So I got to make some tiny little creative contributions along the way, which was kind of fun.
You didn't try and wiggle yourself a writing credit or a story credit off the back of that?
Not that one, no.
Well, I would certainly take yesterday's Enterprise over the Neutral Zone for my on-screen credit.
My very first screen credit was probably the worst episode of Next Generation, called Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
That was my very first screen credit because the producers, again, I think it was during a strike, and they only had an outline of a script for a bottle show where they were going to fill the whole episode with clips from earlier episodes. Right. So they made me go do the video clip research that took 80 hours in 1 week to transfer all these clips to videotapes so that they could try to fill in the plot holes of the story. So I after working 80 hours in 1 week, I said to the producers, I'm like, I think I need a screen credit. And they agreed to it. It was an end credit at the end of the show as a video reach.
Early as well.
Yeah.
Wow. How did it get a season 3?
Writer's strike.
See, because when you first started telling that story, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you sit at your computer and you scrub through it, and I was like, but no, that wasn't how you did it back then, I guess.
No. I literally had to sit over in the post-production office with the big giant VHS tapes and watch hours and hours, and then write down the time codes for each segment that they were going to cut onto another tape. It took a lot of time.
Yeah, I had the same experience in a very different context. When I was in the police and I had to catch a thief who was stealing from the donations at a church, but all we had was a VHS tape CCTV. We were at the point where we were mostly working with at least DVDs, maybe just a USB stick, and this church is like, oh, here you go, and they give us 6 tapes.
Well, the irony of working on Next Generation in the 1980s was the technology in the production offices was still primitive compared to Star Trek. So we had rotary dial phones. Most people didn't even have desktop computers yet. And the script coordinator at the time used this electric typewriter, and she freaked out one day when it wouldn't work. And I was a production assistant, so I came over to see what was wrong, and she had turned it off.
And yet on screen, they're using, what's almost like a modern iPad. So it's when you watch it today, it feels high tech even now. But yeah.
And all those things on the show didn't exist in real life.
Yeah, of course.
And now everybody has them, and we don't even think about it.
I feel like one of those teens in the YouTube videos where it's like, oh, teens react to a rotary phone.
Well, I know we teach English here in Japan, and recently we had one of the, I think maybe it's just in my school, but one of the drill cards was like film. And just all the students were just staring at like, what is that?
Yeah. I'm like, well, it's for cameras. You put it in to take. Oh, is it a battery? No.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny.
But then we also, working in Japan, we do still use fax machines, and until like a matter of months ago, we had paper time cards and stuff.
Yeah, there's a big deal now about like not like using your physical stamp on papers. They're like, let's go digital in 2020. So,
or at the very least, go signatures.
Yeah. Let's get a little deeper in this episode. Luke, you're going to take us through a quick ride on this one.
Yeah, this is going to be coming off the dome, but I watched it with my lunch today, so it shouldn't be too difficult.
Okay, let's roll it.
The Enterprise D encounters a rift in space, and something begins to emerge. Suddenly, we find ourselves in a very different Enterprise D, a militaristic federation at war with the Klingon Empire. And from the rift emerges the Enterprise C, the D's predecessor. Nobody notices this change apart from Guinan, who has a vague sense that something is wrong. After a grueling decision, the Enterprise D convinces the crew of the Enterprise C, now led by Tasha Yar, to go back to their own timeline and die an honorable death to prevent the war.
And the D blows up, right?
The D...
This is a first blow up.
Does it blow up? I remember it almost blowing up, and then it going...
It doesn't blow up.
Yeah, we don't see it blow up on screen, yeah.
Okay.
We see some explosions on the bridge and Riker.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Oh, Riker's gone. The ship's gone.
No one's there to mount it.
It created one of the best scenes of all time when Captain Picard jumps over.
When he vaults the back, that was very
and the Klingons say, surrender and prepare to be boarded. And he's like, that'll be the day.
Yeah.
Well, it's a much more grizzled Picard in this one. But
yeah. The funny thing about that is one day I was on the set and Patrick and all the actors were trying to wrap their minds around this time. This was the very first time travel episode that Next Generation did. And Patrick didn't understand if he was the same person or a different person.
Right.
So I was explaining to him he's the same person up until 22 years in the past. And then he took a different road, which was a world of battle and war and confrontation. And then Jonathan Frakes tried to get me to explain the whole thing, and to this day, every time he sees me, he still says, I still don't understand that episode.
We can keep it if
yeah. Yeah, because at the very young age I used to watch the Terminator films over and over. I feel like I've somehow made my brain four-dimensional. Because people always tell me time traveler stories are confusing and I never get it. I'm like, oh, it makes perfect sense.
And now you're going to tell me that by the time you watched Terminator, he was governor of California already.
No.
His grandmother showed him Terminator movies as a toddler.
I was like 4 years old when I was watching the Terminator films on a loop.
What was the genesis of the story? You kind of picked up the ball with your co-writer on this one, I think. Yeah.
So the original teleplay that was a spec script, which means speculative. It was submitted on speculation. We used to get thousands and thousands of these scripts, but I met Trent and his script was sort of in the pipeline for a long time because it had to be read by multiple different people. And during this time that he was waiting to find out what would happen, he and I became friends, and he started working at the studio as a tour guide, and that was the year that Star Trek V came out. And one of the benefits of being a studio employee, they have employee screenings of all the films. So we went to this small theater on the studio lot and saw Star Trek V one night, and we both hated it. And we started dissecting it, and we ended up at some dive diner on Sunset Boulevard till 2:00 in the morning, just critiquing this movie. And we're both looking at each other going, we could write a better Star Trek episode than this. And I had been working on this idea where the Enterprise goes back to the Guardian of Forever planet from the original series, except this time there's a Vulcan archaeological team working on the planet, and the Enterprise is taking Ambassador Sarek, Spock's father, back to the Guardian of Forever to greet the archaeological team when they finish their research. But in the process, there's an accident back in time, and Surak, who is the founder of Vulcan philosophy, gets killed, and suddenly the whole future is altered, and the Romulans and the Vulcans they've rejoined and created this massive empire to destroy the Klingons, and now they're working on destroying the Federation. And because Sarek was on the planet, the people who are on the planet, their memory is not affected. But everybody on the ship thinks they've been at war with the Romulans, and now they think he's a Romulan spy. But Sarek has to convince Picard that he's not a spy and that this is all a mistake. And the only solution that he can come up with is that if Picard allows him to go back in time, he would replace Surak.
Okay.
And that's because when I was a kid watching the original Star Trek series, I used to think it's kind of weird that Spock's father's name sounds like Surak and Sarek. and then one day I thought to myself, what if they were the same person? And this is how it all happened. So I pitched this idea to Michael Piller, and he's like, oh, no, we don't want to use gimmicks from the original Star Trek, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the same time, Trent and I had been at a Star Trek convention up in San Jose where Denise Crosby had been the guest, and she said to me, you guys should write an episode for me so I can come back to Star Trek. So when one day I heard the producers talking about how Denise Crosby's agent had contacted them and wanted to come back. So Trent and I decided if we combined his original Yesterday's Enterprise idea with my Sarek idea and merged them together, because in his original spec script for Yesterday's Enterprise, there was no time alteration. It was just the ship past shows up, and now Picard has to decide, do we send them back or do we not send them back? We know they're going to die, so we have this moral dilemma. Do we tell them or do we not tell them?
Okay, but there wasn't like a specific stakes on the screen.
And the stake more was, if we tell them what happens, will it alter the timeline?
But you don't really see an altered timeline.
Right. So that was the story, but we decided to combine it with my story where there is an altered timeline. And instead of Sarek being the Catalyst character, we decided Tasha Yar could be the Catalyst character. And because Captain Garrett dies in our timeline instead of her own timeline, that it would be a balance in the universe if Tasha went back with them to give them a fair chance at the battle with the Romulans. And so I went in and I pitched this idea again to Michael Piller, and he called Trent in and to make sure Trent agreed that we were going to combine our stories and share story credit. And so he hired us to write the story, and that's how it all came about.
Yeah, I was reading recently. It's good to give Tasha a proper TV death than getting whapped across the soundstage by a special effect.
Yeah, the first death was not great. So.
Well, I always thought that was one of the best parts of the story, when she finds out from Guinan that she was supposed to be dead and goes to ask Picard. But Michael Piller, who was always arguing with me about the logic of Tasha replacing Captain Garrett, writes this line for Picard where he says, "It makes no sense at all."
Yeah. Where did Guinan come in? Was she in which version did her role? Because this is one of her more prominent roles on the show as well.
In fact, it was the only episode that she appeared in that took more than one day of filming for her. Because because she was a busy movie star back then, they would always write episodes where she would only have to work for one day. And on Yesterday's Enterprise, she had to work for 2 days. But in the original early story development, we didn't have Guinan in the story, but the most difficult part of the story development was trying to figure out how do our crew
How do they know
find
something's wrong? Right.
So we had all these versions of the story where they had sent a probe into the thing before the other Enterprise came through, and then the old probe came back with the old information. Right. And it was just so technical and boring. And so Michael Piller finally said, what if Guinan just knows that something's wrong because her species has sort of like this three-dimensional or five-dimensional, like...
Yeah, she watched a lot of Terminator when they're children on her planet. So
she's kind of your metaphysical cheat code.
And one of the key things about the show is Trent and I wrote the story, but the writing staff basically wrote the teleplay. So there was Michael Piller and Hans Beimler and Richard Manning and Ira Bear and Ron Moore, and they all wrote part of the story up into the script. And it had to happen over Thanksgiving weekend because, excuse me, because Whoopi Goldberg and Denise Crosby's schedules didn't match up for the filming date that they wanted to use originally. So it was going to film much earlier in December instead of January. So the writers had to take home pieces over the Thanksgiving weekend, and everybody had to come back with their act and put it all together. So Michael Piller also wrote a lot of it, but he wasn't allowed story credit because there were too many writers, and the Writers Guild wouldn't allow it. But it was his idea to use Guinan as the catalyst of figuring out that they were in an alternate universe.
Well, the Guinan aspect actually, it gives an interesting twist on it, because if it was just like we have the scientific facts on a probe, the decision's easier. Whereas Picard has to make the decision on like how much does he trust Guinan. So it ends up being maybe a more powerful character moment that way.
Yeah, definitely. And Michael was always really good at all the character development in the show, so that was a great contribution by him.
I guess I want to roll a little bit into design and such. As I understand, this was the Sweeps Week episode, when I guess Sweeps Week was actually a thing, and got a little budget bump for this one for all the small details and such.
Well, speaking of budget, there was a question I wanted to ask before we move off of Whoopi Goldberg.
Oh, yeah.
Which would have been more expensive? An extra day of Whoopi Goldberg shooting or exploding an Enterprise?
I honestly don't know what she was paid, so it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But we had to save the exploding Enterprise for Brandon Braga's episode where they keep going in a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit, I love this one, but I do have to call my favorite. I just like to say the Enterprise blows up at every commercial break. I love that.
I actually get these two confused.
Yeah.
So in my head, Frasier is the captain of the Enterprise C, which is not the case. They're two different episodes.
Okay, I do conflate that a little bit in my head. Captain Garrett's very good in this, but yeah.
Well, and another funny thing is when we did Shades of Grey, I was trying to convince the producers to have the Enterprise blow up in that episode because I found a clip from the USS Yamamoto when that one blew up. And I said, if you use this clip just right, you won't ever see the USS Yamamoto on the hull, and it'll just look like the Enterprise is blowing up in Riker's mind. They didn't buy that.
Well, they bought it a few years later, so that's cool. Yeah. But part of the charm of this particular episode is all those little details that I guess they had time to do. Even weird things, like there's stairs on the bridge now. I mean, it's pretty wild.
Well, the funny thing is, when we were writing the story, we were trying not to do anything expensive because of the budget, but Michael Piller always told writers, don't write stories based on what you think the budget is. He just told writers to just write your stories, and we'll figure out the budget later. But we were still trying to be sensitive because we wanted them to actually do the episode. Yeah. And we're like, if we make it too expensive. So we were pleasantly surprised and kind of shocked when we started seeing the dramatic changes. But just the lighting effects alone, I think, made it super dramatic. I love the lighting effects on the bridge.
Yeah, because me and Matt are both big uniform nerds. So like when we were watching Picard, every time it like flashes back, we're like, oh, a new uniform from a different period. So this one, we basically get 2 new uniforms in one episode. So that's pretty exciting.
I saw Matt's notes about the uniforms, and I totally agree with you. It was so stupid. Like, they're walking around without the undercollar, and they don't have the belt on, so there's just belt loops for no reason. I'm just like, why are they doing that? But whatever.
Yeah, it's a little off-putting. I don't know. Yeah, you gotta have a stuffed shirt, I guess, if you're gonna be in a monster maroon.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And this is still when they just on the uniforms, when they still have that weird mix of the old smelly spandex ones and the newer, classier ones, I guess.
Well, the uniforms ended up being the famous blooper from yesterday's Enterprise, because they actually changed our crew. They changed the uniforms a little bit so they're different from the regular Next Generation show. So like the cuffs are different, and so at the end of the show, when Geordi's talking to Guinan after the time goes back to normal, he's wearing the wrong uniform.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
And he's asking Guinan about Tasha, but he's wearing the alternate universe cuffs on his. And some keen-eyed fans caught that, and that's one of the.
No, you got to claim that was deliberate. That was your sequel hook for the later episode where it turns out we had that Geordi or something.
That's what I always said, because my job as a script coordinator on the show was to do continuity explanations. So whenever fans would come up with some like continuity issue, I would come up with some crazy story. This is foreshadowing that the universe didn't go back entirely perfect. And then later on, Ron Moore decided to bring back Denise Crosby as her own daughter, which was kind of an extension of yesterday's Enterprise, which we never planned, but it was an interesting after effect.
Just while we're still on the design, the Enterprise C itself is a nice, I guess, in-between design, and I think that has a little bit of a story behind it.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I know that Andrew Probert had designed an Enterprise C back in the early days of Next Generation, but that wasn't the design that they ended up using for the episode, because it had to be sort of thrown together at the last minute. But maybe you know a story that I don't.
I think that's pretty much what I heard. It does have a nice, like, right between the feature films and the Enterprise D, which worked out rather nicely. So.
I love it. I still wish I had a model of it, but I don't.
Do you know? I assume one has been produced.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're out there, but I didn't want to build one. I just wanted one already.
Right.
Made.
Okay. No, I'm the same. I've got an A and a D. They're back in the UK actually, and here in Japan, I often see model kits of them, but I'm like, oh, but that's a lot of work. I've got a Gundam it's actually a Digimon over there, which I've been putting off building for about a month.
I used to build models when I was a kid, and like one of the things when I was like 12 and my friends and I used to play Star Trek outside, we actually built our own models out of paper plates and cardboard tubes and stuff.
How do you want better? We used to just find bits of bark that we thought looked like spaceships. Those were our spaceships.
No, I saw my father building ships of the line, and I was like, I don't want any part of that. It's too much.
I did used to play like the Warhammer style miniatures games, but I was far more interested in playing it than building them. So mine had very simple paint jobs. As my brother's the other way. He loves building them, but he doesn't play it so much. So I'll get him to make me an Enterprise C for Christmas.
Well, there's some people on Facebook. There's a Facebook page called Shipyards, and it's all guys building Star Trek models. Some of them are their own designs and stuff. But there's this one guy who's doing a yesterday's Enterprise or a Enterprise C model with the lights and everything in it.
Nice.
And it looks amazing.
maybe we should think a little bit about the messages or the deeper meanings in this episode. Are there any particular, I guess, philosophical points you were trying to get through with the story here?
Well, every time I see the episode, I feel like even after 30 years, it really stands up to the test of time in terms of sort of being an anti-war movie. When Guinan's arguing about how many people have died and Picard's being hesitant about taking a chance that it's all wrong. I don't think there was a super like hidden meaning to the episode other than we wanted to bring back Tasha Yar.
Right.
It made for an interesting platform because there really was no other way unless you're doing flashbacks or something boring, but I just thought it was a cool platform for bringing back Tasha Yar.
Yeah, I guess the nice thing, it's sort of like we get like believable human reactions to completely unbelievable situations here. You can really follow Picard's line of thought, like, his idea that this really, like, I guess he didn't quite scream, it doesn't make sense, but you can sort of hear him saying that in his mind through half the episode.
Well, I like that. Obviously, he does in the end make the decision that, yeah, we should send them back. And part of me reads that as he knows that it's wrong that the Federation is a war machine. But that's not what Star Trek is about. So in a way, Fallon's right, it is all wrong.
I also feel like he knows that they're going to be defeated and they're on their last leg. So he sort of kind of resigns himself to I can take this chance because it doesn't really make any difference at this point.
It puts a slightly interesting twist on Star Trek 6 because this tells us that maybe the Klingons could have won.
Yeah.
Whereas part of the point of that film is that now the Klingons know they can't beat the Federation, they'll sue for peace.
Right. Different timelines.
I mean, there's like a 70-year gap where they could have found some new dilithium, I know.
Right, exactly. But, yeah,
before the burn.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you don't know the burn yet? Okay, we'll get. Yeah, well, you do that later.
Spoiler.
Yeah,
I'm good. Luke's catching up on that particular one.
I'm guessing that's Discovery.
That's Discovery.
Okay.
So sorry to anyone else listening to this that maybe didn't hit the Discovery yet.
That was vague enough that I've no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly.
So it's all good.
But if you know the burn, we're burning. That's cool.
Got me burning.
There we go. Got you burning day and night. Is it day and night?
No, you said it was last time. That's not the line.
Okay, that's what it plays in my head.
It's in the third degree. This is deep cuts for a song that plays in a nightclub in The Terminator, which Matt got the words wrong too.
Twice. The other big character, I guess, the character we obviously get into is Tasha Yar, which is, again, very human reactions to an even more unbelievable situation. Picard at least gets to have continuity between the realities where Tasha is like a ghost.
And I thought Denise Crosby's performance was the best performance of her time on Next Generation, honestly, because she got to be featured and there was some emotional resonance to her having left the show. And even though she'll never admit it, I think she regretted leaving the show, especially when it became very successful. And obviously she was the one asking to come back, so this was a little nod to her. And of course, one of the other characters that we haven't talked a lot about is Trisha O'Neill, who played Captain Garrett, because she was fantastic, and she was also a fan of Star Trek. She said when she found out that she had been cast to play Captain Garrett, she was trying to bring out her inner Kirk. That's what she said. And I got to go to a Star Trek convention with her where we were kind of incognito for a little while, and then some fans recognized her, and suddenly she was like surrounded with like a mob of people asking for her autograph. And I think actors who guest star on Star Trek sometimes don't realize what an impact they have on the fans. And she was just such a nice person, and she also appeared again twice more on Star Trek in different roles. She played a Romulan or a Klingon in the episode Suspicions of Next Generation, and she also played a character on Deep Space Nine.
Well, I know Trek tends to reuse quite a few actors, often in very different roles. So,
well, and also even although she maybe only had 20 minutes of screen time, for people like us, we watch these episodes over and over. So in our heads, she's had many hours of screen time.
Well, and I was just proud of the fact that we got to be the guys who created the first woman captain of the Enterprise back then.
Yeah. She can. Well, yeah, she can say now she is an Enterprise captain.
Yeah.
Then there's Christopher McDonald, who the whole meme now is you put him on your show when you want it canceled, which would have been dangerous for season 3 TNG, but he's also pretty good here.
Matt's just Googled the role, which I now realize is where I recognize him from, as Shooter McGavin.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the actor's name. All I can remember is Shooter McGavin.
I have to tell you, there was a funny blooper that never made it on the show for obvious reasons, but in the scene where he and Tasha are in 10 forward and she's ordering rations, lunch rations or whatever, and they're chatting back and forth, and she keeps calling him Lieutenant, and he's like, don't call me Lieutenant.
Yeah, I won't salute if you won't.
So the funny thing was, in one of the takes, and I was down on the set when this happened, he said, don't call me Lieutenant, call me Richard. And she responds, okay, Dick.
You could get away with that in Discovery, maybe not in TNG.
I know there's a punk rock album in the 90s, which the title was not Richard, but Dick.
And Whoopi Goldberg was funny. She was a lot of fun to work with. When I was a production assistant on the show, she used to get away with murder because she was Whoopi Goldberg. But one day, U2 was filming a music video on a nearby soundstage. So she convinced me and Will Wheaton to go with her over to the other stage, and she introduced us to Bono and the band. And we're like, and I'm like freaking out the whole time because she didn't tell the assistant directors that she was leaving the stage. And I said, if they find out, I'm going to get fired. I said, you're not going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. But she was crazy. I loved working with her.
You mentioned Will Wheaton there. Is this the first time we see Wesley in a uniform?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Another little first.
And the funny thing was Susan Sackett, who worked for Gene Roddenberry, her and her writing partner had sold a story that was in the pipeline where Wesley gets promoted to ensign and gets his uniform for the first time. And we sort of beat her to the punch. But she was like, I can't believe you did that.
It's an alternate timeline. It's cool.
Yeah, it doesn't quite count. Before we move on completely, we're talking about Tasha. Had she actually fully come back to the show, this could have been an episode where you could have done it, I guess.
I guess if you stayed in an alternate universe.
Well, I mean, you'd have had to go back with the sea and then somehow get frozen or something like that. But yeah, that I could have seen a way that they could have written it into that story.
Well, that's part of the fun of sci-fi, though. You always have a way to tech the tech.
Yeah.
Which, as you mentioned earlier, this episode works out quite well in the end because it
doesn't do too much of that. Yeah.
Tech the tech so much.
It's funny that we were ever allowed to do this episode because Rick Berman didn't like time travel stories and he didn't want to do them. And which I always thought was ironic because when they started Star Trek Enterprise, it was nonstop time travel like stories in every episode practically. So we opened a floodgate of time travel.
Yeah, in the past few years, I've opened my Trek way more to the philosophical points, but mind bleepery was always my main key into any series. Time travel being one of the main ways to do that.
See, I don't dislike a good time travel episode, but I don't like my Trek to have too many.
Yeah, you got
this one's right in the sweet spot for me because they're not just bouncing around messing with time and it makes everything feel inconsequential. This one, the time travel comes with like real weight and stakes.
Well, and our characters didn't do the time travel.
That definitely helps. Yeah,
it was just sort of a side effect of the other ship coming through the spatial anomaly. So that was cool too.
Yeah, like we're doing First Contact soon. Great movie, but at the end there's like, okay, I guess we're going back.
Right.
It's just like putting the car into drive or something.
The only thing that we weren't allowed to do, which I was disappointed in, was at the end of the show, when the Klingons tell the Enterprise to surrender and prepare to be boarded, I wanted them to show the Klingon commander on the view screen.
And it was going to be Michael Dorn?
Yeah, as Worf. And Michael Pillar's like, oh, that's a step too far. There's so many coincidences already in this episode.
Guess.
Nobody's going to believe it. Nobody's going to believe it.
No, because I was sat there watching it today, having not seen it for a while, assuming that's what was about to happen. It felt inevitable.
Even if it was just his voice, it would
right.
be nice. I mean, nowadays, that would be like the Easter egg of the day, right?
I was going to say, if that's too much of a coincidence, how about his granddad being Kirk's lawyer?
And I was in that scene. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know.
Where Kirk and McCoy are on trial on the Klingon home planet in Star Trek VI. I was one of the Klingons up in the rafters.
Oh, wow. How much of the makeup did you have to wear?
So the funny thing is the actors who are close up on camera are the only ones who get the
right. That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
All of the guys in the rafters, we had these rubber masks, and they were hot as hell, and the sweat was dripping through the eye holes, and it was a miserable experience.
Yeah, I had my one chance to be an extra on the film. I didn't take it not for makeup reasons, but because they wanted me to get up at 5, and I wasn't having any of that.
Well, it took 2 days to film that trial scene, and on the second day, half the extras didn't come back. For those of us who were left in the rafters, because it was a 360-degree set, and they would show it at different angles.
So you had to move to
they would move us all around the set and tell us to stand in different positions. So I'm in every angle.
Right.
Yeah, got to be a little gung-ho there. Okay.
It'd be like when you play a sports video game, you start noticing, oh, that's the same guy in the crowd at every different stand.
Yeah.
Getting in, I think we've already all come very clearly on the page that this holds up. I'm pretty sure it ranks in pretty much everyone's top 5 TNG episodes.
Once upon a time, it was in the top 2.
Well, yeah, definitely when it aired, it was.
Yeah, it was probably the best one when it aired, but quite good.
I worked for Michael Pillar for many years, including after he left Star Trek, and he started his own production company. And because he wrote Best of Both Worlds, he and I used to always argue over which episode was more popular on Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds or Yesterday's Enterprise. So we finally agreed that he wrote the best 2-part episode and I wrote the best 1-part episode.
That's a nice compromise. There you go.
So the prune juice, is that Pillar Filler or who came up with a warrior drink?
That might have been Ron Moore. I'm not sure who wrote the teaser, but that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So tell me the story about your parents pranking you.
Oh no! This was I went to a local church. I was a Boy Scout, and one of the other Boy Scouts, his father was like a priest at Methodist church, and I went to their New Year's thing, and I won the prize of prune juice. So I went home. I was excited. I was like, "Hey, look! I won something!" And my parents we're pretty sure that's a practical joke.
You won the booby prize for
I won the prune juice. It would have been a few years before this episode aired, so I couldn't make. It might have been about the same time. Maybe this episode's why I thought that prune juice was.
Yeah, you won a warrior's drink.
I got a warrior's drink.
That's pretty funny. Pretty funny.
Yeah, it's like getting excited for winning the wooden spoon.
Hey, wooden spoons can be useful.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need the prune juice.
I think I need one actually. So.
Wait, prune juice or a wooden spoon?
No, wooden spoon.
Okay.
Definitely don't need prune juice.
What was the part of your notes where you said something about Guinan was talking to Worf about human women. And
His laugh at that was just so wonderfully condescending.
Yeah, the idea that a human woman could handle him.
I guess this is where Worf starts becoming the Star Trek punchline. Although on the other end, Michael Dorn also becomes the best Star Trek one-liner. So
yeah,
in DS9, he just always comes through with the fantastic one-liner anyway.
Yep.
Although with one thing I really liked, just cinematography. Both times you see they've switched universe. It's the shot of Stewart, and the camera pans slightly, and you see the security officer behind him. That was nice.
Oh, yeah.
Because the first time when you do it, it's Tasha, and then the second time it's Worf, and
Yeah, that was pretty cool. The only thing that drove me crazy about that scene was they're all watching the Enterprise C come through the portal or whatever, and Tasha's reading off the call numbers, NCC 1701, and nobody's reacting. They're just sitting there. And then she says, C, and they all go.
Yeah, it's weird enough that it's 1701.
They were still processing the numbers, sometimes it takes us.
And I was on the set when they were doing that, and I just kept thinking, oh my God, somebody would recognize those numbers. Like, it's their own numbers.
See,
Little
I
stuff
never
like
say it 1701. I always say 1701.
I don't know. Maybe it's a British thing.
I think it's because it looks a bit like a year.
Yeah.
I've never thought until now about how weird it is that I say it that way.
Now I don't know how I say it. Oh, well.
I think I say 1701 too. But I think in that scene, she's like reading them out. Like,
it's definitely 1701 in that scene, definitely.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, they would all recognize that number.
Well, if I read this year, I think this episode's airing in 2021, but if I was like, it's the year 2020, it'd take a second.
Yeah, maybe that's why they don't react, because she's reading it weird.
It's the year 2020, the crappy one.
It's 2020. Oh.
Let's not go back to that year.
It's like Too Fast, Too Furious. 2020.
You've seen the meme with Picard and Wesley in the turbo lift, right? And Wesley says, how come the doors on the Enterprise don't have handles? And Picard says, you don't know about the year 2020.
I hadn't seen that one, no, but that's good.
Yeah, running a mile a second. I don't want to kill anyone's time too much. Are there any other major points that Eric or Luke you want to make about this one?
There's nothing else I wanted to bring up about the episode. Eric, I can see you've got some memorabilia behind you. But what I'm noticing, you've got that little Torii gate. What's that one from?
I was born in Okinawa.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So my parents got that when I was a baby, and it's got my name and birthday.
Oh, amazing.
I was born at Camp Cooey Army Hospital.
Okay. There you go.
We had a run down there a few years ago, and fortunately got to see a Shirley Castle before it unfortunately caught on fire. But
yeah, I fell asleep on the beach in Okinawa and burned my legs really bad. That's my main memory of Okinawa.
It's probably changed a lot since I've been there 57 years ago.
I mean, it's one of those places that when you're there, it still kind of looks like the 70s. So maybe not.
And
I just gather it's more touristy now, more hotels. And
so we were literally staying in like a hotel complex, super touristy area. So it definitely was for us.
They were nice enough to take us to the top half of the island with fewer people, so that was nice.
Yeah.
But and you're now in France, are you?
Yep, retired.
That's what it is. I connected your Facebook. It looks like a lot of wine and flowers. Is it?
Oh yeah.
Sounds like France.
We're in a relatively rural area, so I get to do a lot of nature photos.
Nice.
And until we get to travel again, we got so many places we want to visit. That was one of the reasons we decided to move here, because Captain Picard was born here. No, just kidding.
we're in Nagano, Japan, and without the ability to travel, well, there's plenty of things to do in Nagano.
This is a good year to live somewhere rural, definitely.
Yeah.
There's plenty I can do.
There's so many amazing villages everywhere you go in France that even once they lift the lockdown, we can at least go visit the smaller villages and stuff.
That's nice.
But Eric, I guess we're wrapping up. Do you have anywhere on the internet people might head for some information on you or something you'd like to share?
Well, on Facebook, I have a page called Yesterday's Enterprise where I just post general Star Trek stuff, but people can find me there. And I also have a personal blog called boldlygoing.com or .blog. And it's not just about Star Trek. It's basically about my adventures traveling and living in France. But I always sort of try to connect it to Star Trek. So I did a vlog entry before we left California because the last place we got to visit was the winery where they filmed the episodes of Picard where he lives in France.
Oh, yeah.
And they gave us a private tour of the villa, and so that was kind of fun. And then someday when we're allowed to travel again, we want to go to the part of France where Picard supposedly was born in the future and do a blog about that. And I have some friends who live in France, like actress Carolyn Seymour, who appeared in several episodes of Star Trek. She was a Klingon or a Romulan commander in the episode where Troy was disguised as a Romulan.
Okay, I watched that one quite recently.
And she just lives a couple hours away. And there's a French fan club in France that made me an honorary member this year. So we're hoping we'll have a chance to get together with the fans and do some fun stuff once the pandemic dies down.
How is your French? We're the same with Japanese.
That's well, our Japanese, we'll get the same response.
I'm working on it. To be a long-term resident, it's kind of a requirement.
Yeah, same here.
My biggest hurdle coming up will be trying to get a French driver's license.
I hope it works better in Japan.
I have to study the French driver's manual and then take a test, so we'll see what happens.
I had to take the Japanese test 15 times to get my license.
I'm lucky because as a Brit, I can just convert my license. It's not so complicated.
Yeah, Americans can't do that. We got to do the practical test, and just like if you're a centimeter off, I fail.
Well, the weird thing is in France, if you're from a specific state that allows you to exchange your license, there's like 20 states that allow it. Right. California is not one of those states, so I have to start from scratch. No. At least in French, the words are
the same alphabet, at least.
Yeah. I don't know how you learn how to do Japanese.
Very slowly is the answer.
And so we're basically an audio podcast. I might post a video, I don't know, but is that a Star Trek theme Aloha shirt there? Christmas, is
yeah, it looks like it.
Well, it's not Christmassy. It's just a retro 60s.
Oh, I dig it. I was seeing the Enterprise as like a reindeer. That's why I thought Christmas, but yeah, that's hip. I used to have a wide selection of my Hawaiian Aloha shirts, so I always appreciate that sort of thing.
I guess I didn't need to wear this shirt if it's just audio.
Well, I am glad you wore a shirt for our benefit at least.
And yeah, Luke, we recently finished our Monster Month, but you want to tell us where to find a few more of the monsters?
You can find our podcast on Twitter at MLSFS Pod. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Just search Matt and Luke Sci-Fi Sanctuary. If for some reason you want to hear more of my voice, you can find my Pokemon podcast on Twitter at Luke Loves PKMN and my Monster Hunter podcast at Monster Mash Pod. And if you like the music you heard during this podcast, you can find Matt's music at rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com.
I just let him do that now, because if I do it, I'll just start stuttering and staring off into space.
Every time I do that advertising spiel, I hate myself a little more.
I know my wife said I should have brought a copy of my book, Yesterday's Enterprise, but since it's not video, it doesn't matter.
As we were talking before, we'd love to have you back to talk a bit about Insurrection. I believe you edited Michael Pillar's book for that, did you?
Well, I was the script coordinator for the movie.
Right.
I worked with Michael through the entire development and the 5,000 versions of it that he wrote. And then I worked with him to, when he wrote the book, The Making of Star Trek Insurrection, I did all of the typing for the book and all the proofreading and formatting and all that kind of stuff.
I read it.
What?
Oh, I read it a few years ago. I quite enjoyed it, so I'll probably have to reread it again before getting into Insurrection. But
yeah, Insurrection was an interesting process for sure.
But as for now, we're wrapping up that Enterprise from yesterday. So,
yep, Eric, you and I'm afraid the listeners at home are going to have to go back through that rift and die for us.
To save the future.
Yep.
There we go, to save the future. But yeah, thanks. I don't want to eat up your whole day there. So definitely groovy chatting to you about this one. And yeah, we haven't even posted in our own podcast. We've recorded up to Generations and only posted up to 5. So we'll be getting to Insurrection before too long, but not quite yet.
Okay.
And if you're up for it, we definitely appreciate having a chat with you on that one. So
yeah, for sure.
That's an early spoiler. That's kind of my guilty pleasure TNG anyway. It's the one I just like kind of enjoy watching and like zoning out to. So first contact's a little heavy sometimes. So
yeah. Well, I could start talking about it right now. But
we'll ask you some questions about that in the future. So
yeah, okay. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Have a groovy day out there then.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.